Yeah.
Was that part of the brain again?
So the question is the relationship between the shape of the pine cone to the pineal gland, or this particular gland in the brain. It's a fascinating study. The ancient Egyptians used to cut cadavers in half, and you can actually see half the brain. And if you open it up, you see what they call the optic thalamus. In Latin, optic thalamus means chamber of light. And so they named it that for a reason. It's actually a little chamber, and the pineal gland sits inside of it, and it sits in a floating sac of fluid. And it's the only gland in the body that doesn't touch anything except via liquid. It has no tissue that touches anything. It emanates electric current and piezoluminescent light through liquid, through cerebrospinal fluid. And the ancient Taoists, the Hindus, the Egyptians, the Buddhists, all believe this is like the seat of the soul, or the resonance of consciousness in the human body. And this is why you see this iconography all over the world, where, in the Egyptian tradition, you'll have a Uraeus serpent at the third eye. It's usually a cobra and or a vulture, sometimes both. And they have different significances, but they're always right here. And they're actually just, what they're representing is that being, that person that's in statue is a self-realized being. And they have they're become aware of their kundalini, mastered their chemistry in order to change states of consciousness. And that iconography represents the third eye. And that's why the Bindi dots in the Hindu is there. That's why they put that there. So the pineal gland is a fascinating study. Dr. Rick Strassman in DMT, The Spirit Molecule, fantastic book. He approaches it from a chemical perspective, because our body creates DMT naturally. All mammals do, and a lot of plants. And so he goes, well, it's obviously important that because we create it, the body knows what it's doing. It's obviously important. But why does it flood the pineal gland under certain circumstances, like extreme stress, fatigue, deep states of meditation, orgasm, obviously power plants, different types of chemistry that you introduce in the body will change your levels of DMT. The pineal gland actually works in correspondence with the pituitary gland. Pineal is said to be electric and male, and the pituitary is said to be magnetic and female. And they actually, to try to make it short, they produce a different chemistry. Each one of them, it's a unique one, and they drop down into your medulla oblongata, and they go down, and somewhere along the lines, they start to blend together, the two chemicals, down the Ida and the Pingala nerves. They go all the way down through your energy systems, your chakras, or there actually is 7 glandular systems that are physical that you can see. They go down to your ovaries or your testes, and in that place, they fully become a new synthesized chemical. And it's a creative chemical. This is what life force comes from. This is why we make babies. It's like your body is creating chemistry that on its own cannot create new life until it becomes synthesized with this again, you might call it a hormone. I'm not exactly sure if it's a hormone or not. But if you use that, you can create a new life with male and female coming together. If you don't use that and you tantra, if you channel that, it naturally goes back up the spine on its own because of its density. It's electrically charged, and it naturally rises up to the solar plexus, which, let me just say this real quick. Every doctor in the world, no matter what language you speak to, you go, I got this pain right here. And they're like, oh, it's the solar plexus. I don't know what your pain is. Everybody calls that the solar plexus. Why? Doesn't matter what language you're speaking. It's solar plexus. Because the ancients knew that there's a specific place behind the gland here that is actually regulated by the sun. This is why our pineal gland is light sensitive. It's why it controls our sleep patterns, our dream patterns. In other words, that chemistry sits in a little tiny chamber, a little nave right here in your solar plexus, and it pools. And it will continue to rise, but apparently there's a lot of things that can affect it. Your breathing, your stress level, the things you eat and drink, and then the time of year, the harmonics of each month affect it. And to make it simple, they rise up to they go back up to the brain, and eventually the idea is that new synthesized chemical will reach the optic thalamus. But in order for it to reach there, it has to go through a series of chambers. And a lot of it, there's a certain amount of it that needs to be reached. Actually, they say it's about 1/10. And this is where we get the word tithe in the Western tradition. To tithe is to live a certain life to where you actually get 1/10 or tithe back to your optic thalamus, because it will affect your consciousness and make you a more spiritual being, make you a more interconnected, loving being. And so all these practices, any tradition will do this. If you sit in a sweat lodge with the Native Americans, your DMT and your pineal gland is being activated. If you practice yogic meditation, tantra, walk on the beach, I mean, there's all kinds of things that will affect it. And so, in other words, that chemistry goes back into the optic thalamus, and those piezoluminescent cells in the pineal gland, they absorb that electric charge, and then they also emit light. And that's why it's called the optic thalamus, is that light bounces around in there at angles which we would call crystalline, which is actually where we get the word Christos in Greek, which means sacred oil. So Christ, consciousness, refers to this process. Sacred oil, going back to your pineal gland and illuminating your consciousness, quite literally.
And that'll have to be our last question tonight. If you want to talk more with Ryan, please, he'll be here for a moment after. And okay.
Thank you. Thank you guys for listening.